All right, welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinsky, and I am your host for today's much anticipated program. It is a real privilege and an honor to have Dr. Carl Werner back with me to continue this important series on evolutionary frauds. Today's program continues to demonstrate the collapse of evolution. Carl's presentation will focus on the widespread fraud in human evolution. Now, before I hand it over to my guest, though, I want to give him a formal introduction, and then we're going to get into some fun. I am excited for this. In his sophomore year of college, Dr. Carl Werner was challenged by a fellow classmate with these words: "I bet you can't prove evolution." Disturbed by his classmate's somewhat poignant criticisms of the theory, Dr. Werner, a biology major at the time, pondered this conversation for some time. From this point, he began his quest for an answer. Driven by his stringent scientific background and exceedingly curious nature, Dr. Werner read and researched every topic he could find on evolution, including paleontology, geology, biology, and biochemistry. After 18 years of study, from 1979 to 1997, Dr. Werner considered himself ready to begin a series of experiments to test evolution. It was his grand experiment to test the theory and determine its veracity. Over the next nearly 3 decades, 1997 till the present, Dr. Werner then traveled 298,000 miles to museums and dig sites around the globe, photographing thousands of original fossils in the actual fossil layers where they were found. Now, Carl, this is part 2 of our ongoing series. Part 1 was a blast, very informative, and we've received some truly excellent feedback. And in a way, that was only just a teaser or a sneak preview into the widespread fraud that we are going to witness, that's going to be exposed today in the world of human evolution. Carl, my brother, how you doing today?
Good, and it's so nice to be with you, and thank you for having me on your show.
My pleasure, Carl. And so I guess for the audience sake, since we are doing this live and they are excited to provide their feedback, and if we got critics in the chat, feel free to put in your objections, challenges, and just ask your questions. So what we're going to be doing is a presentation. You got some slides for us, some visuals, Carl, and then we're going to have some back and forth, you and I, with some audience questions mixed in. So Carl, I'm just going to hand it over to you, and the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Donnie. 2024 is a historic year because this is a year that naturalism, that is, that everything came about naturally, collapsed. And there has been problems all along with the idea that the universe formed naturally. It doesn't work. There's been problems all along that life could form from chemicals at the beginning naturally, and that doesn't work. I covered that in the last episode. And then there's problems with the fossil record. It doesn't work. You have 1 billion fossils, and all of the animal groups just suddenly appear, the phyla. And evolution theory has been hanging on to 3 best proofs of evolution that everyone has more or less ignored all these negative problems with naturalism and said, well, at least we have these, and that is evolution of whales from like a dog-like animal, evolution of birds from a dinosaur, and evolution of humans from an ape. But last week, Donnie, I showed you that those first 2 have collapsed, the whale and the bird evolution. And I know this because I was personally involved in the collapse. I had interviewed the scientists who were the experts who had found some of these, and they retracted them on camera. So in my mind, and I'm ahead of the pack because I know all this, what I've done so far. In my mind, the whole theory now rests on the theory that humans evolved from apes, and this is considered the best evidence fossil evidence that humans evolved and that all of naturalism is correct. And when we began filming these interviews with the human evolution scientists, I think 40 in all, it became apparent that there was problems in this field of human evolution. And the problems were they were making so many mistakes. And also occasionally I would hear about frauds from the evolution scientists themselves. Now, when I was filming these interviews, they didn't know that I was questioning evolution as part of my grand experiment. They were just telling me, this scientist committed a fraud, this scientist committed fraud. And these were the evolution scientists reporting on their brethren. And now I'm certain that human evolution has collapsed, and this causes the entire theory of naturalism to collapse, and it collapses this year, 2024. Now, these are always big words. This sounds like a big hype job from like a flim flam man making up these claims, and so, today I promised I was going to show you some of these frauds, and I want to jump in here and go to that. So now I'm going to flip over to my slides, and
yes, I got them on screen for you, Carl.
Thank you. So there have been, and I have documented 150 frauds carried out by human evolution scientists. Now that is a lot of frauds in just one small area of science. The field has only been there 150 years or so. That means there's a new fraud every year on average, but it's actually they come in groups. And now I want to clarify what I mean by fraud. Scientists can make mistakes, but they can also commit frauds, but they're completely different. Mistakes are just not, the scientist didn't intend to mess up. He was just overzealous. That'd be like a scientist finding a pig tooth and say, oh, I think it's an ape-man. Or he could mismeasure, oh, I thought this skull was 700 cc's, but it really is only 500 cc's. I just messed up on how I measured it. Or I misinterpreted it. I thought this crocodile leg bone was an ape-man collarbone. They're just misinterpreting it. And they're just bad science where they're taking data that you can see doesn't work. But mistakes are common in the field of human evolution, and no one knows these numbers, but we documented 42,000 mistaken stone tools. That would be the scientist picks up a rock and looks at it and says, oh my gosh, this is an ape-man stone tool. 42,000 times they were collected, but then turned out to be not a stone tool. And another example of mistakes in the field of human evolution, just to show you how rocky this field is, even before we get to the frauds, is 232 times they have identified a species of ape-man, and it turned out it wasn't an ape-man. It turned out it was just a monkey, or just a dog, or just a horse, or just a reptile, or just a human. So they have hundreds of mistaken ape-men, and they have 200 mistaken bone tools where Raymond Dart picks up a upper jaw of an antelope and he thinks, oh, this is an ape-man scrub brush. And he identified bone tools that were later found out to be just bones, And it's very common for evolution scientists working in this field to mistakenly assign a certain age to a fossil or the fossil layer, and then say the next year, say, oh, I changed my mind, it's this layer, and next year change their mind. Again, it's this layer. That's very common. And they have this large problem of renaming the same animal over and over and over and over. And this violates the international norms for how you name species. Like a dog is Canis familiaris, but no matter what dog you see, it's always Canis familiaris. Same with humans living today, Homo sapiens. But they gave 46 different species names to Homo erectus. It would be Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 46 times They renamed it so that each scientist could claim that they had found another ape-man. And same with Neanderthal. They renamed Neanderthal bones. When they find the new Neanderthal bone, they say, oh, this is a new species. It's not Neanderthal man, it's Homo priscus, it's Homo briledensis, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these mistakes are just kind of dirty for the science, kind of shows how unreliable the science is. But those are just mistakes. Hey, we all make mistakes. I get it. I'll give them a pass on that one. But fraud, Donnie, is evil. It's ominous and it's dark. Fraud is when a scientist in this field, in human evolution, fraud is when a scientist knowingly misleads his colleagues or the public by any means, including hiding the most critical information that everyone needs to know, altering the photographs, altering the fossils, altering the diagrams, altering the charts, and just lying. And fraud is knowingly deceiving. It's very hard to prove fraud, to come up with the evidence of fraud. And yet I have 150 frauds in this field. The frauds are so many, plus all the mistakes, plus all of their hiding fossils. They don't share their fossils with their colleagues, plus all the limited fossils they have, maybe just a fragment and they call it a new species. This now causes the entire theory of human evolution to be tenuous. So, I mean, what would you call this? Collapse? I don't know what you would say, but when you have this long list of ape-men or examples of proofs of evolution, human evolution, that turned out to be fraudulent, where they knew they were wrong, they knew they were lying, they knew they were telling stories, they knew they had altered the photograph, then this is the day when you can step back and say, okay, evolution has collapsed. And I never thought I would ever say that out loud. But to be honest with myself and with you, I did this for 27 years. I never thought, like even 2 years ago, that I would be saying this. But now as I ponder on what actually I found in these interviews, and I'm going to show it to you, I have to say that fraud is prevalent. The theory of human evolution has collapsed, and the theory of naturalism, that everything came about naturally, has collapsed. There are so many of these frauds that I'm not going to be able to do all of them. At the end here, I'm going to get tired because really the frauds take 4 television shows to go through, and that's episodes 5, 6, 7, and 8 in our video series. And I encourage everyone to go to our website, thegrandexperiment.com, and do the video streaming this evening or tomorrow, and just start watching these episodes 5, 6, 7, and 8. I won't be able to do all of them, but I'm going to show you the most spectacular frauds that are going to make you just throw up. And if you're an evolutionist in the audience, and by the way, I'm so glad you're here because I was one of you, and I am just so glad just to have a chance to explain this. I think you're going to feel defrauded by your colleagues, because when I was taught evolution evidences in medical school and believed evolution, I gave a great deal of trust to my professors. Professor Temple at University of Missouri, he taught me frauds, but he didn't know he didn't do the homework, and I feel so upset that he did that. And I think you might feel upset also. I'm sure the Christians and anyone who believes in creation are going to be dancing as I'm going through these, because this is it. This is the day we've been waiting for. All right, so now I'm going to go through some specific examples and show you the fossil fraud. First one I want to do is the 3 frauds of Homo habilis. That was found by Dr. Philip Tobias at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. And his whole thing was that he had found Australopithecus bones. He and Louis Leakey and Napier, they had actually collected Australopithecus bones, but they decided that it was a new ape-man, and they thought it was halfway evolved between an ape and a human. And so they said it's a large-brained ape-man, and so they gave it the name Homo. and habilis. But in retrospect, most of the scientists who are in the know, and you can see the hundreds of references I have for that in my book series, will say there is no such thing as Homo habilis. It's Australopithecus, and these guys kind of did a boner here. But I want to show you how he took a 500cc Australopithecus and changed it into a 700cc Homo habilis fraudulently. And I'm going to show you the three skulls. Here's the first one, STW53. And this is a Homo habilis skull. And Donnie, can you see those bones on the left side there on your screen?
Yes.
So there's like 14 bones. And they, Dr. Tobias found these bones. And he said, oh, it looks like an Australopithecus. It looks like a Homo habilis to me. And he asked his colleague, Ron Clark, to reassemble them and put them into a skull. And this skull on your left, where all the bones are pointing to, is the reconstructed skull he created. It's called STW53. That's the name of it, of the fossil, and it's a Homo habilis. Now, Dr. Clark made the skull for Dr. Tobias, and I took 3 pictures of this skull that Dr. Clark created. This frontal view where you see the eye sockets, but the same skull I took a picture of from the bottom view, and you can see the foramen magnum on the bottom, and you can see the same skull on the right side of the skull. So all 3 of these skulls on this picture are STW53, okay? It's just 3 different views. Do you get that? Everybody get that? So when this was done, it turned out to be a very small skull, like around 500 cc's. Dr. Clark presented it to him, and Dr. Tobias, who wanted it to be a large brain ape-man, was very, very dissatisfied. And he said, it's too small. I want it to be bigger. And Dr. Clark says, well, I can't make it bigger because I lined up the bones where they fit. If 2 bones fit together, you put them together. If they're both part of the midline, you put them on the midline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He was an expert at this. And Dr. Tobias says, I want you to take it apart and make it bigger. He says, I'm not going to take it apart. And it's like, it is what it is. It's a small-brained skull. And Dr. Tobias would have none of this. So he went around Dr. Clark and asked a graduate student, Dr. Darren Kerno, to take it apart and reassemble it. So this is what Dr. Kerno did. See, now you see his skulls, the reconstructed skulls on the right, the furthest 2 on the right, the wider ones, okay? And here it is. You can see that he elongated the skull by putting more plaster on the bottom of the skull. And he put more plaster between the pieces on the side of the skull, and he basically changed it from a 500 cc to around a 700 cc skull. And Dr. Clark, when we interviewed him in South Africa, by the way, all these photos are mine. I can vouch for every photo. These were all taken in the same frame, so I know that they're the same. They're the correct representation. I stand by all of this work 100%. So don't think that I enlarged the pictures, okay? And I can show you the originals where they're all in the same picture at the same time. Well, Dr. Clark was livid that he took the skull apart and enlarged it, and he called it a fraud. And I was dumbfounded while we were interviewing him. I want to show you this clip. It's a little bit long. It's 2 minutes, but this is him describing Dr. Tobias asking him to enlarge the skull. So here we go.
Dr. Ron Clark accused Dr. Tobias of committing fraud by enlarging an ordinary Australopithecine skull, STW53, to create a large brain Homo habilis skull. He characterized it as a forgery, similar to the Piltdown Man fossil forgery.
The Piltdown forgery actually was very clever. The STW53 forgery by Kerno and Tobias was stupid.
In a recent interview, Dr. Clark described the events that led up to the fraud.
Philip Tobias summoned me to his office and he said, I want you to make a new reconstruction of STW53. And I said, oh, why? And he said, well, I'm not happy with the brain size. It's too small. And I said, but that's the way it is. It can't be made any bigger. The anatomy shows that was the size of the brain case. He wanted it to be a Homo habilis. In fact, he kept publishing this as a Homo habilis. He then asked a research fellow that he just appointed there, Darren Kernow, he asked him to make a new reconstruction. And what Kernow did was he separated out this near contact here. He separated it out by 8 millimeters and made this wider. He flexed the parietal occipital contact here. He flexed it upward to make it bigger. He took apart other pieces as well and expanded it. And he moved this frontal bone forward to make it very elongated. And it's totally false because there was no justification for what they did. It was simply Philip Tobias's ambition to make this into a Homo habilis.
So that was only one of the skulls that he altered. This next one is actually more upsetting because he is altering the type specimen. It's skull OH7. You know, the type specimen is when they find the first bone. And in this example, OH7 was the first bone. They said, oh, this is Homo habilis, a new ape-man. It wasn't, but this is Homo habilis. And the type specimen, whether it's just a piece of bone or an entire skull or an entire skeleton, it doesn't matter. But the type specimen is like the measuring stick that all other scientists will come to your vault and compare their fossils to your fossil. You don't mess with a type specimen because it's almost sacred, because it's like the most important thing for this, quote, new species. So another skull that he found, well, Louis Leakey found this one. It was skull OH7, Olduvai hominid number 7. And he said this is the type specimen for Homo habilis. And here's the photographs that he published of the type specimen. This is a left skull, and it's the outer surface above and then the inner surface. They flip it over and then the inner surface. And, you know, I don't see anything crazy about that other than somebody put letters on it. But Debbie and I had the honor to go and photograph these fossils in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, with the director of the former director of the National Museum of Tanzania. And when I took these photographs of the same skull, I didn't know that I was going to be comparing it to these photographs, black and white photos. I found the black and white photos later. So they're not taken at exactly the same angle. You know, the camera has to be centered at the same place for them to look exactly alike. And you can see that's the same bone, but the camera is just not set exactly right, but you get it. And when I saw this, I was like, what is going on here? And again, this was another attempt for Dr. Tobias to enlarge an ordinary Australopithecine skull and make it into a large-brained ape-man so he can claim that they found a new type of ape-man. And see, now, when you look at my picture, the color photograph, and his picture from his monograph, like, what is going on here? Where is B? Because I photographed the fossil, but when I put it next to it, it's like, there is no B. And I look on the picture now even more, you know, under a microscope, so to speak, my microscope of, you know, like looking at hard, it's like, oh my gosh, that is plaster. piece B is he put a big piece of bone in with plaster, but he didn't have the bone. He just decided to enlarge the skull with that piece of plaster. And that is not acceptable. No way for a type specimen. But he could claim, he could then do some measurements and say it's a bigger skull. And then when I looked at fragment A, not on his picture, you can't see anything going on with fragment A, but when I looked at fragment A on my picture, the color photograph, it's like, what is going on here? That doesn't even look like the same bone. Now, I'm going to flip both pieces over. These are the outside surface. And now we're going to flip both pieces and look at the inside surface. So here was a flip. Now I flipped them over. And again, you see fragment A, it doesn't look at all like the rest of the skull. And I started to think about this. Well, you know, by the way, you can have different colored fragments. Like if fragment A was out in the sun and fragment B was buried in the dirt, they could look different, and that's acceptable. But here's a guy who's already done one fraud with STW53, and now he has connected a fragment that doesn't look like it's part of it with a straight line connection. Now, if this was a puzzle piece and it fit like a puzzle piece, very unique shape, you'd say, oh, I'm pretty confident that goes there. But the straight lines are so common in the fossil skull pieces that you could easily be fooled and put a straight line skull piece from another animal onto your skull fragment and say, oh, that fits, when it really doesn't. And in fact, part A wouldn't have fit onto the straight line of the bigger part of the skull here. So he had to fill it in with plaster with it, which that red arrow is. So now he's once again is putting plaster on the type specimen. And it appears that he's adding a bone that doesn't belong to the skull. I didn't know. I kept thinking about it. Now I went over to the other fragment. That first one I just showed you was a left skull piece of OH7. Here's the right skull piece. His photographs in black and white, mine in color, the outer surface and the inner surface. When you look at the inner surface of our pictures, it's like, this is a different one. This isn't the one we just showed you. This is another one. It's a straight line connection of a piece that does not look like it fits. So now he's added plaster twice. He's added two fragments twice, and they don't look like they belong there. And so now I'm on a mission, and I have to read this boring 400-page monograph that he wrote, 3 volumes, you know, and I find this sentence. He said, this skull, OH7, was pieced together from a number of fragments found separately. So, you know, like the big piece could have been in one location, and these other pieces could have been 100 yards away. It just, oh, here's a piece. Let's put this onto this one. He doesn't clarify what that means. To me, it looks like he did another fraud, and it fits in his pattern because this was not his last fraudulent thing. He actually had, I think, 7 frauds, but I'm just going to show you these 3. This third fraud was yet another Homo habilis skull that was found at Olduvai Gorge by Louis Leakey, OH16. Again, his mission is to make a new large brain ape-man, so he wants to enlarge it. And on the left is his reconstructions from his monograph, the first 2. The one on the right is my photograph of the skull at the museum vault. If you'll notice, he again enlarges it by separating the bones. If you look on the bottom right, let me see if I can get my mouse to go over to the other screen. I don't know if I can, but yeah, there it is. If you look over here, I don't know if you can see my mouse here. See, there's no space between these bones. But look over here, he puts plaster between it so he can make the skull wider. And if you go over here, this other attempt he did, it was even wider. And if you just look like up here, how much plaster he's putting between these skull pieces and compared to the real specimen, which is they're touching. And if you examine this, it's all over. He's spreading out the bones to make a large-brained ape-man. And like I say, I think I had him down for 7 frauds. Those are the 3 that are just so over the top that I'm just disappointed with him. Now, I have 150 frauds that we documented. Those were 3. We have 147 to go. No, we don't, because we did 2 of them on the last show. So we only have 141 to go. So whatever the numbers. The next one is as consequential as the Homo habilis, because everybody's heard Homo habilis. I grew up with Homo habilis my whole adult life. And this one, though, is even more consequential because this one affected the entire school-age children of the world. His book and this diagram ended up in the school books and in the school classrooms in foreign countries that don't speak English. I heard reports of this. He made this chart that this chart. It's the ape to human chart. And it was published in 1965, and the book is called Early Man. It's Time Life book. And he shows on the left this small little animal called Paleopithecus evolving to a large human. And the diagram is labeled the road to Homo sapiens. You see, these are the animals that go from an ape to a human, and all the animals between the small one and the last one are ape men. This diagram is fraudulent, and F. Clark Howell, who we interviewed, should be I don't know, tarred and feathered for this thing. This was over the top, and I'm going to show you why. He knew that 10 of these 14 animals were not ape men. For example, the first one, Paleopithecus, if you knew the ape called the gibbon, Paleopithecus looks like a gibbon. And he says that the first animal in his chart is an ancestor of the gibbons. In other words, it's not on the road to Homo sapiens. He thinks it's an evolutionary ancestor to gibbons, but it looks like a gibbon. Okay, so that was fraudulent to put it in this chart. By the way, nobody ever in this audience, I would be surprised if anybody ever read this book. They all saw the chart, but nobody read the fine print. Even myself, I went through this book and I missed all this until we did the interviews. And I said, all these other scientists don't believe this. I got to go back and see what he said. And I realized he knew these animals were not ancestors. Like the second animal was proconsul. It looked like a chimpanzee. Everybody agreed on that. And Clark Howell acknowledges it's an ancestor of the chimpanzee. I don't believe it's an ancestor of chimpanzee. I just think it's another chimpanzee-like ape. But it wasn't on the road to Homo sapiens. According to him, it was on the road to chimpanzees. Dryopithecus, we interviewed his graduate student, and he said that Dr. Howell did not believe Dryopithecus was an ancestor of humans. Oreopithecus, he documents that it's on the side branch of a man's family tree. It is not an ancestor of humans. The fifth animal that he knew was wrong was Paranthropus. He said that's an evolutionary dead end in man's ancestry. In other words, it couldn't be an ancestor of humans. Why couldn't it? It looks like a gorilla. If you see like a Zinj or Paranthropus, they look like gorillas. He knew this was not on the road to Homo sapiens. And he placed 5 animals in this chart that he knew that he himself said were Homo sapiens. Now, you can't put 5 Homo sapiens in a chart on the road to Homo sapiens. You only are allowed to put 1 animal. That would be, you could pick any one of the Homo sapiens, but you can't put all 6 of them on there. But he puts in 5 Homo sapiens, and essentially 10 of the 14 animals in the chart, which is the gut of the chart, he knew were not ancestors. And it turns out the other 4 that I'm not X'd out yet become X'd out when we find out other faults by other scientists. So the whole chart gets X'd out, and this was a fraud. So I don't know who's going to count. I'm going to quit counting because I'll start messing up the addition. The next ape-man fraud I wanted to go over And by the way, most people don't know this information. This is just coming out this year. And we had opportunities to photograph in the museum vaults in Nairobi to get this one, and Dar es Salaam and South Africa, so even the college professors of paleoanthropology aren't going to know this. Even the paleoanthropologists aren't going to know many of these things. They know some of the frauds and they've kept it quiet, but a lot like this next one, I don't think anybody knows. So Richard Leakey, the son of Louis Leakey, found this ape-man called the Turkana boy, and it was spectacular because it wasn't only a skull, it was a nearly complete skeleton. And what strikes everybody when they see this nearly complete skeleton is that it looks like a human skeleton from the neck down. Everybody, both evolutionists and creation scientists, would agree on that point, that it just looks like a human skeleton. But the skull, oddly enough, sticks out at the snout area like a chimp or an ape. You see this snout area? Donnie, can you see my pointer on that screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, see, this sticks out much more than a human would. And when I took the photograph of this skull, my heart sank. I was like, this is amazing. I just didn't expect it to be so ape-like, and yet the rest of the body is human-like. It just struck me. And I guess that would be a physician seeing thousands of skull x-rays in my career. And I was just like, wow, this is a pretty good proof of evolution. And when I got home and compared my photographs, or Debbie's photographs of this one, of this skull, to his published photographs, I realized it was fraudulent. Do you see anything fraudulent on this black and white photo? No, there's nothing to be. I mean, you got a skull and there's some bone missing, and that it's labeled, with white plaster that they put in where the bones were missing. And nothing seems wrong about this, okay? But when you look at my photograph of the same skull, like, what's going on here? Where's the white? What's this stripe going down the side here? And I realized that, as far as I can tell, by interviewing Richard Leakey before he died by email, and the director of the National Museum in Nairobi, that this white bone on the left is photoshopped, because you can see that there's bone missing on our color photograph, but wherever bone is missing, it's black filler. Now that's okay. You can either do black filler, white filler, you can do red filler. It doesn't matter. You just got to indicate where bone is missing. But why would he first of all, why would he change the photograph and Photoshop in some of the missing bone with white and not other parts of the missing bone, such as where you see all those white arrows? Why isn't that painted in white? Because that's black filler also. So he's preferentially drawing your eyes to the missing bone, but drawing your eyes away from what he could do to manipulate the skull. This is amazing. So then I realized, what is this where these white arrows are? In humans, there is no space between the frontal bone and the parietal bone. Those bones butt up against each other, like this. And there should be no space for a child that's 8 years old, 12 years old, whatever they think this kid is. They're all hooked together. But there's this big space, like he pulled the bones apart and wanted to do something with his skull. And then where the red arrows are, you can't really see it so well, but let me go back to my photograph. You can see that there's black plaster fill here, and it was even more apparent on the real specimen and on the video. See that? And here. And what he's done is he's disassembled, or he has now the ability to move everything here in the front, because he has a break point here with filler, a break point here with filler, and a break point here with filler. So now he can do what his father did and what he did. The Leakeys have done this 3 times, is they moved the face. And one reason I know they move this face is because when you try to put the lower jaw onto the skull, it doesn't fit, which is a sign that there's something wrong here. And so I wrote Richard Leakey, and I wrote them. I said, why is some of the Photoshop? They couldn't answer that. And I asked Richard Leakey, this is right before he died during COVID, and all these email communications are in my book, in the bibliography. I said, Richard, I was startled by how prognathic, or how much the nose is sticking out, the muzzle is sticking out, because I was thinking Homo erectus was so human-like for the rest of the body. And I was asked him about it, and he said, you know what, Carl? He said, it's wrong. It shouldn't be sticking out like that. Are you kidding me? So not only did they alter a photograph and didn't tell you that they altered the photograph, and your eyes are drawn away from all the alterations, but then he admits that the skull was reassembled wrong. Yeah. I don't know if this is getting to you, but for me, I'm just like dying for each one of these. And
oh, it's getting to me, brother, and also to many in the audience. This is excellent.
I you know, and this is when I start showing the photos and comparison, then you realize this is serious. Carl Werner is just not making this up to try to make a buck. You know, by the way, I don't make any money on this project. If this isn't a get rich quick scheme, this is what I call a get poor quick scheme, where 2 people, Debbie and Carl, pay for traveling around the world, own dime, own time, pay for all the equipment, pay for all the airfares, et cetera, et cetera. It's millions of dollars, and we'll never even, there's no way we'd ever make enough money to even pay off, just some of these cameras that we have. So don't think, if you're a pro evolutionist, this is even a creation, that this is a get rich quick scheme. This is not. Right. This is a get poor scheme. So
that's right.
But I am happy to get poor for you. And obviously I'm not poor. But here we go. Okay, so that was another set of frauds. By the way, he also altered 1470. You can see that in the movie. His dad altered Zinjanthropus, again moving the faces either in or out, whether they needed to make it look more ape-like or human-like.
If I could, Carl, just one clarifying question, just because I might forget, since we got a lot of questions coming in. We got over 100 people in the live chat, just really enjoying this, brother. So you're saying he admitted, after you asked him, after you pointed it out, that it was altered?
Yeah, well, he said the face is in the wrong position. Now, I mean, what do you call that? It was reconstructed wrong.
Right, right.
But he said, no, it shouldn't be sticking out like that. I don't know if he knew he was close to death, because he wasn't in good health, and he's like, I better clear my conscience. Yeah. I don't know.
Because this was before anybody had ever pointed that out or said that this is in the incorrect position. It was after you had to ask him. Is that right, Carl?
Specifically ask him in the email, why is this white on there? And I'm surprised about the skull face sticking so far out. And he said it's wrong. I was like,
wow.
Yeah. So,
and yet people look at this, students look at this, kids look at this information and these pictures, and they put their trust in the scientific community and these paleoanthropologists. And yet these skulls, these specimens are in the wrong position. They're in fragments. These are things they're not being told, which is why I think your work, Carl, is so incredibly important.
Oh, yeah. And if you go to Dr. Don Johansson's book, From Lucidity Language, it's a beautiful book. It has, pictures, full-page pictures of skulls. It's just not about Lucy, but they have pictures of all the skulls. Well, they have a picture of this skull. And I was like, how did I miss this? And you know how the picture ended up in his book? A full picture. You could see every detail. He did it at an oblique angle from the front, so you can't see the side view. So it's not obvious that there's something wrong with this.
Right.
And if you also go to the movie, we show you the steps of how the skull gets moved. So anyway, that's another fraud.
Wow, this is great, Carl.
Thank you. We interviewed Dr. Don Johanson in 1997, who found Lucy, who's supposed to be a ape-man. Oh, by the way, why do I use this archaic term called ape-man? You can put me on full screen for a second, Donnie. I use the word ape-man because the evolutionary language is very confusing and nobody could follow you. And the evolutionist scientists are happy to lose you and be able to confuse you. But I'm trying to bring clarity to everybody. See, they would call Lucy a hominin, but before the year 2001, they didn't call it a hominin, they called it a hominid with a D, not an N. So they flipped the definitions, totally flipped them. And so now every time you say the word hominid, you have to say pre-2001 or post-2001. Every time you say hominid, you have to look that up. When did he say that? And then there's the hominoidy, and then hominidae, and homininidae. And so I could just like BS you and tell you anything, and you'd say, I guess he's smart. I guess it's true. No, when I use the word ape man, everybody knows what I mean. It's not an ape, right? It's not a human. Ape man's not an ape. It's not a human. It's an animal on the evolutionary line between an ape and a human. Everybody gets it. You don't even have to explain it. That's why they don't like it, because it's too simple. And then you can start asking questions. So I know the definitions of hominin and hominid. And if you're offended that I'm using the word, I'm talking to the evolution audience, or maybe not, the creation audience too. If you're offended I'm using the word ape man, just whenever I'm saying ape man tonight, just put in the word hominin. Okay. But I'm going to make it simple so everybody gets this and you can see how bad these frauds are. We can go back to the screen. Debbie and I interviewed Dr. Don Johanson in 1997, and he made the claim that he had found an ape-man named Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, in 1973, 74. And although it was just about 3 to 3.5 feet tall, it was a tiny little chimp-sized creature. He said it walked upright like a human. And that's kind of weird because all of the anatomy of Lucy is ape-like. For example, this is the knee joint he first found, and then the next year he found the skeleton. The skull is ape-sized. The hands have curved bones like apes. The arms are long like apes. The legs are relatively short like apes. The pelvis is flat like apes. You know, the chest is barrel-shaped like an ape, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a 3 foot tall or 3.5 foot tall ape looking like creature. But he says, no, it's not an ape. It walked upright. Really? Okay. Well, let's hear it. Well, why is it walk upright? Because here, this knee joint. So let me just tell you the story. He finds in 1973 in Afar, Ethiopia, this knee joint. This is a photograph of the actual fossil. I had to spend a lot of money because they won't let you photograph the original fossil. I had to pay, I don't know, $600 for this photograph. So enjoy my poor quick scheme here. But anyway, he found this knee joint. He said, "Oh my gosh, this is a new type of ape man." He only had this knee joint, okay? And he said, "This knee joint is something strange. It's small like an ape, but you can see it's a human knee joint, right? And if it's a human knee joint, it stood upright. And so isn't that strange? A 3.5 foot tall ape that stood upright. It's an upright walking ape man." So we will, when we find the rest of the skeleton, which they did in 1974, about, I don't know, 60% or something like that, they reconstructed it, but they put her upright. So it looks like a human posture. Why did they put it upright? Even though all the anatomy points of this skeleton are ape, the knee looks like a human knee. So yeah, this is it. We found the ape man. Has anyone ever heard this story? Yes. If you read Johansson's book, that's what he says. When we interviewed him, that's what he says. If you go see his 3-part miniseries on Nova from 1990, whatever, what year that was, he says the same thing. The knee is human. I don't want to drive this into the ground, but you got to get that part. So he said it's worse than that. It's such a solid, rock solid case. He said in white here, this white font here, all detailed anatomical analysis and biomechanical considerations of this joint indicate that the hominid possessing it, which is the ape-man possessing it, afarensis, was fully capable of upright bipedal posture. So all analysis of the knee joint, every scientist that did analysis, including him, determined this was from an upright walking creature. It was a human-like knee. I get it. You know, who could say that knee joint is ape or human? Nobody in this audience has the capacity to say he's right or wrong, because it's like, I don't know. I couldn't tell the difference between an ape and a human knee joint. It's very difficult, you know, but he's an expert. We believe him. And he said it wasn't just him, but everybody, all analysis indicate it was an upright walking ape man. Well, Debbie and I dumbly, we're just dumb filmmakers, jump on a plane. And right before COVID, we interviewed his partner, Yves Coppens, Yves. You see that on the screen there. That's the article they wrote when they found the knee joint. Yves Coppens was the co-director. They're directing the dig site where the knee joint gets found and where Lucy gets found. Now, Yves Coppens in Europe is just like Johansson in the United States. He's famous because they found the Lucy skeleton. I mean, you know, and he's considered, you know, like Johansson, but they talk about in Europe about Yves Coppens, and here we talk about Don Johansson. Everybody gets to be the star in their own country. I had no idea I was going to do this interview, and I had no idea he was going to say this, but we just turn on the camera and I say, Dr. Coppens, this knee joint of Lucy. Dr. Johansson says it's proof that Lucy walked upright. Was the knee joint of Lucy a human-like knee joint, meaning it walked upright, or an ape-like knee joint? And I know what he's going to say before I even ask the question. I'm just almost half asleep. Dr. Coppens says the knee joint of Lucy is ape-like. What? We just heard for the last 40 years this BS story, and his own partner says it was ape-like, which means Lucy would be an ape, by the way, because everything else is human. Everything else is ape. I like, oh my gosh, let me pick my jaw off the floor now. And you know what? We interviewed one of Johansson's former students who attended his classes at Berkeley. This was a creationist, Dr. Dwayne Gish, and we have it on camera. It's in the show. And he attended a lecture where Johansson said, I did a multivariate analysis of the Lucy knee joint, and here's the data. And he puts the data up on the screen. And Johansson concludes that the knee joint of Lucy is ape-like for his graduate students. That's what he tells his graduate students. So it wasn't all biomechanical analysis. Not even he and his partner believe this. Now, if this is astonishing, this should make everybody just, wow. And this is going to go on and on and on. The only reason I found out about it is because I got access to the scientists and the fossils. And if I had more time, I'd probably come up with 300, but here's 150 is enough. The second point of Lucy that Dr. Johansson said was that in a locality 2 countries away, see, Afar, Ethiopia is in northeastern Africa, 2 countries away, Laetoli, Tanzania, that's south of Kenya. In Laetoli, Tanzania, 1,000 miles from where we found that knee joint and where we found the skeleton, they found human footprints. Well, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Who cares? He said, no, this is proof that Lucy walked upright. Lucy, that was found in Ethiopia walks upright because these footprints down in Tanzania, Laetoli, Tanzania, are human-like. And the only animal found at Laetoli, and here's under the red line here, were Lucy-type fossils. It wasn't Lucy because Lucy was found up in Ethiopia. It wasn't the knee joint because the knee joint was found up in Ethiopia. But they found other bones that they called afarensis in Laetoli. And what were these other bones? He said, you got the footprints, and the only other bones at this site are afarensis, or the Lucy type of fossils. So he makes this argument in his book and also in his video series on Nova. Hey, who else could have made these footprints? Because we find the human-like footprints, we find the Lucy-type fossils next to them. That means Lucy-type fossils made these footprints. Well, it's a little bit of a hollow argument, isn't it? Because, how do you know that? There could have been a human there and you just didn't find it. I'll go on full screen right now, Donnie. And, so maybe he is, maybe not. I understand why he's making that argument. But Debbie and I got on a plane and flew to Tanzania, and we asked the scientists, the former director, we said, could we photograph all of the fossils that were found at Laetoli? And they said, sure. So this is about a 3-hour process. This is what you want to do on your day off. They pull out the first one and it's labeled Laetoli hominid fossil number 1. That's LH1, Laetoli hominid 1. And it was like a afarensis or a Lucy type, maybe a jaw or something like that. Then I photograph it, put it away. Next one, Laetoli hominid 2. What is it? Oh, it's like a Lucy type tooth. Okay, photograph, fine. Laetoli hominid 3. Okay, so it goes on and on and on and on. And it's taken hours. And then he's, okay, I'm ready. Here's the next one, Laetoli hominid 18. What does he bring out? Remember this quote here on screen here. And let's go back to screen here, Donnie. He just said there was no other ape-men or humans found at Laetoli other than Lucy type. And Laetoli hominid 18 skull, and this is my photograph, is Homo sapiens. I don't get it. And this is so blatant. This is so ridiculous. See, because if you knew that there was a human skull there, you could have said, well, how do you know that it wasn't these footprints? Well, now they're trying to say, well, this skull was found in a different layer and all this. Well, that's fine. But why didn't you say that at the beginning so we could start looking at this 40 years ago? And no, that was another fraudulent lie. And he knew this was in the collection because there's several reasons. He added to the collection. He reopened Laetoli collection and reopened that dig site, and he added to the collections after this one. And this was a published fossil. Nobody knew about it other than just the insiders, So yeah. So let's see here. That appears to be the end of those slides. Donnie, I just want to, you can take me to full screen. What do you feel like time-wise? How far have we gone time-wise?
We're doing pretty good. We basically just hit the hour mark. We've
Okay.
still got over 110 people in the live chat. Very lively live chat. We got a good mix of critics and non-critics. Yeah, this is getting people talking, brother. That's for sure.
He's a liar. Look at him. You can tell by that shaving air on his face that there's something wrong here. Well, I'll just throw it out to you. I have the ability to do, like I could do Ernst Haeckel and I could do Neanderthal man if you want to do 2 more, or we could just call it a day and just go to the discussion. I don't want to. Debbie tells me I'm socially inept, that I don't know when to quit talking. And so
no, I think you're doing great. We're used to, on this channel, comprehensive programs. So if you want to do another 2, I know the audience isn't against that, but that's up to you and how you feel. And then I've already saved quite a few questions that I think will be really good for us to interact with, just to leave no stone unturned. So we can do 2 more. and then get into questions if that works for you, Carl. But whatever is most convenient for you. I'm loving this. I'm really enjoying this. So, and time's flying by too.
And by the way, I don't expect that I'm going to get through all 150. I am thinking that I'm giving you the hors d'oeuvres for the meal. You know, I'm giving you toasted ravioli, as we say in St. Louis, and you got to go to the theater and watch it. And it's not at the theater. You just got to go to my website and watch these 4 shows on the frauds. 4 shows, 50 minutes each. And one show is the frauds that occurred in Europe. One show is the frauds that occurred in Africa. One show is the frauds that occurred in North and South America. One show is the frauds that occurred with this latest ape-man, Tumai. But I can't do it all. You know, it's just the faster I go, the more nonsensical I talk. You know, I'm kind of like President Biden, you know. So
well, and that's exactly why we titled this one Widespread Fraud in Human Evolution. It is so wide, it's bankrupt at this point, Carl.
It started in 1870 and it's current. It goes through all, I mean, it's just not the old stuff, it's just not the latest stuff. It goes all the way through time. And I'm just going to give you a few of these. So let's go on and let me see if I could pick out a screen. I think I have to go to a different screen, and hold on just a second. I'm technically inept here. Entire screen.
You're doing good. And I love how in this episode, for anybody just joining us, we did part 1 a couple weeks ago. Excellent feedback. So I do want to encourage people to check out part 1 and also check out this one, obviously, because they complement each other. And Carl, so far today, correct me if I'm wrong, you focused on Homo habilis, which is one of their favorite so-called transitional. So I'm so glad you addressed that one. Homo erectus, that's been a popular one for years and years and years. And then the famous Lucy, which is probably their all-time favorite, Australopithecus afarensis. So you've hit 3 of their favorite, 3 of their icons.
Yeah, and then that time life chart was their icon, and it still is the icon for the public. They know it's fraudulent or, you know, mistaken now, but they won't, like the Leakey Foundation, they still have those animals that are in there that have proven to be not ape-men. Leakey Foundation has those symbols on their website of what they believe. You know, it's like the 5 ape, you know, ape to human. It's just crazy. But yeah, so I would go, take me off screen, just my face now, Donnie. I want to talk about Ernst Haeckel to set this up. Now, Ernst Haeckel was the first fraudster, and he was the greatest fraudster. He did 58 frauds. And if you talk to historians, and we have the historian interviews in our video series, and you talk to the experts on who Ernst Haeckel was, they say that Ernst Haeckel was the most famous evolutionist of all time. After Darwin died, I think Darwin died maybe in 1882, something like that, and people were questioning some of Darwin's writings, Ernst Haeckel kind of comes up, and he's down in Germany, and he comes up with all of these proofs for evolution and human evolution. And because he was coming up with proof after proof after proof after proof, where everybody else couldn't find ape-man fossils, so to speak, he became the king. And when people talked about evolution, they weren't thinking of Darwin, they were thinking of Ernst Haeckel. And Ernst Haeckel is dark. His work is dark because he is responsible for the racism that was of the 20th century, the 1900s, in the United States. And I'll explain that. Just don't jump off the screen yet. Listen to this, because I know that you're going to say, what is he talking about? But in the American Museum of Natural History, you know, that's the most famous museum in the United States other than the Smithsonian in New York City. From 1920 to 1965-ish, 1960, for 40 years, they had a display up that showed an ape evolving into a human, and the intermediates were always Black people or Australian Aborigines. So it went from ape to Black man to white guy. That is so damaging. And you wonder why we had so much racism in the United States, even after Lincoln did the, proclamation in 1865. And you wonder why the apartheid government, in South Africa, why was there racism going on still in 1950 in South Africa? Because the evolutionists were promoting this idea that blacks were not human. No. A black is not a human. Now, this is their words. No, a black is either Homo niger or Homo ethiopithecus or Homo hotentotus, depending which area of Africa they are found or in the Pacific area. No, blacks and the islanders and the New Zealanders and the Aborigines from Australia and Alaskans, none of these are human. These are ape men, and we have thrown them off the species of Homo sapiens. And Haeckel was responsible for giving them species names: Homo arcticus for the Alaskan Inuit, Homo Americanus for the American Indian, Homo Papua for the person living in Papua New Guinea. It was really atrocious because the scientists were promoting this. And who were the scientists promoting it? Where was this coming from? It was from Ernst Haeckel. You have to understand why this is so important, what I'm going to show you, because now racism has been around against black people long before Darwin, because the slaves in the United States were black, and that was before Darwin's theory in 1700s. Racism has always been here, but when the evolution scientists started doing frauds, they caused it to just explode. And I'm going to show you that. I'm going to show you why the American Museum thought that blacks were ape-men. It's Haeckel, and it's Haeckel's drawings. And by the way, Haeckel was also responsible for the idea in Germany that eventually led to the Holocaust. You can trace Hitler and his ideas of eugenics and superior race. It all goes back to Haeckel. And I don't expect you to believe it, because I'm not going to give you the information. We go to my book and just read through that. When I say my book, I'm talking about the Untold Stories of Human Evolution, and volume 4, the 9 categories of overturned ape men, that just came out, volumes 3 and 4 in the series. But you can read all the Haeckel stuff. But I want to show you how this all came about. And we'll go to full screen now. I'll go back to my drawings of Haeckel here. You might have to trim off the edges of that, Donnie.
I think, Carl, you might have to reshare the screen in the present option.
Okay. Hold on just a second.
No problem. Take your time.
Oh, I didn't double click it. Oh, sure. It doesn't allow double clicking. You have to hit the share. Now, tell me if you can see it now. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, I can see it.
You might have to clip that around because it's the whole screen. You might have to trim it a little bit. But this is Haeckel's drawing on the left. And he did not present these skulls. I did the work to get these skulls on here. It's from Haeckel's book here on the right. And you'll see on the bottom 3, it starts with a couple of monkeys. That's animals at 12 and 11. And I hope you can see that on the bottom. And then they progress and they evolve into apes, animals 10, 9, 8, and 7. And then they progress into colored people, people of non-white skin, black people, brown people, yellow people. And those are animals 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They are the ape-man. And he called, the Asian guy here Homo flavus. He wasn't Homo sapiens. He called this guy here Homo Americanus. He called this guy Homo Papua. He called this guy Homo niger. And he called this one Homo australis. Okay? And he says that monkeys evolved into apes, which evolved into these ape men, which are really humans, Homo sapiens, and evolved into a white guy that looks like a Greek goddess. It's an atrocious thing, but without the skulls here, you would say, gosh, these 5 humans, I thought they were humans, but they kind of do look like ape men. They kind of look how far their noses are sticking out and their lips are sticking out. And yeah, I can see the progression. Well, I went and got the 12 skulls for these 12 animals and put them up here. I want to show you something. Human skulls and humans, their face doesn't stick out much in front of the brain case. And can you see those red lines there, Donnie? That's the line that is from the front of the brain case going down to the front of their face. And, you know, the face maybe a little bit sticks out here, and that doesn't stick out here, a little bit sticks out here. But basically, the front of the brain case lines up with the front of the face. But in apes, it's completely different. The front of the face sticks way out in front of the skull brain case. Can you see that, Donnie? Am I making that clear?
Yes. Yep.
The face sticks way out in front of the brain case for gorillas and monkeys. Okay? So the reality is, and this was how he got away with his 58 frauds that I detailed in the movie, is he doesn't provide photographs of these 5 people here. He provides his drawings, his interpreted drawings. You see, look at a Papua New Guinea person has a flat face, but he pulls it out. Same with the African. Look at the skull compared to what he draws. Look at the Australian Aborigine compared to what he draws. He just creates his intermediates, and that was whatever. That would be 5 frauds there in that diagram that he was responsible. He was the king. He was a leader of all of evolution, and he was a king of fraud. And I'm going to go to his next fraud here. This is a diagram so powerful to teach you that we all evolved from a common ancestor, a bacterium. If you look at a dog embryo, Donnie, and then you look at a chicken embryo, and then you look at a turtle embryo, way back at the early stage, man, oh man, they look the same. Well, I guess if we all look the same in our early embryo life, that we probably at one time were all the same animal. And then, yeah, maybe we evolved more than a turtle or a chicken, but really all animals have their early embryos all look exactly alike. Now, I didn't find this one. There was a book written called The Frauds of Haeckel. I think it was 1915 or something like that. You can find it in my book in bibliography. And the scientists, probably because of all this racism stuff and all of his anti-Semitism stuff and the anti-Jewish stuff that was going on through Europe, they took him to task and they started really analyzing what he had done here. And they realized that this is the same picture 3 times printed. You don't really realize it till they point it out to you, right? You know, but yeah, that is the same picture. And he just labels them, oh, figure 9 is a dog and figure 10, no, that's the same picture. And again, he doesn't provide photographs. It's his interpreted drawings, and these are wrong too. Then this is the one that really irks me, is this idea that humans and all these animals, fish, salamander, turtle, chicken, rabbit, all have a common ancestor, because if we look at the embryos of these 6 animals, in the early stage, we look just like a fish, and a salamander does too. And in fact, we all kind of look like a fish when we're early in our embryos, but as the baby grows inside the womb, it becomes more like a duck and more like a chicken and things like that. Believe it or not, I was taught this in 1979, and I'm still bitter about this. I was taught this in 1979, 100 years after this was published, but it was 90 years after it was shown to be fraudulent. This was shown to be fraudulent in the 1800s. But I was taught it because the evolutionists wouldn't take it down. In fact, it's still in the textbooks today. If you open up the McGraw-Hill 2000 biology book, this picture, or rendition of this is in there. And here's how my professor laid it out for me. Look, you see the gills and gill slits here on the human? It's just the same as the gills and the gill slits on the fish. And look, see how a human has a tail? And look, the fish has a tail. And look at, so they just go through, and it's like, it's very convincing, but it was all made up. And any embryologist would tell you this. And this finally came to a head in, I think it was 1974 or something, maybe it was 1992 or something. A guy said, okay, we have never got the photographs of these things at the same stage. So let's find a fish embryo, a salamander embryo, all at the exact same stage, just to match Haeckel's embryos. So these are photos. This is his drawing of what he saw. These photos should exactly match Haeckel's drawings because they're emulating the stage that Haeckel picked. They don't look anything alike. It's the craziest thing in the world. He dry labbed all these pictures. Dry lab meaning he just made it up with his pencil. He didn't actually do the work. And then he becomes a famous great evolution scientist, proving that human evolution and evolution is true. And that is bogus. Oh, it's 1997. I see. That is bogus. And it just goes on and on. I think now I've done, I don't know how many of his, 10 or so frauds. Here's his diagram to show that humans are actually apes. Have you heard that, from an evolution scientist? I know that the evolution people in the audience believe this, that humans are basically apes. And this idea comes from Haeckel, and it comes from a Haeckel fraud. Now, Haeckel lived in the late 1890s, but before him, there was a man named Thomas Huxley, and he was a strong evolutionist, and he did 5 side-by-side comparison of drawings of a human skeleton, a gorilla skeleton, a chimp skeleton, a orangutan, and a gibbon. And maybe he put the orang too far upright and the chimpanzee and the gorilla, because most of the time the 4 apes, they're down on all fours, but they can get up. It's okay. It's pretty accurate. And I want you to notice that the apes, the 4 apes on the bottom, their big toe is splayed out like this. And that's why they call apes quadrumania. They used to call them quadrumania because they don't have feet. They have 4 hands. Their feet look like their hands, where it looks like they have a thumb. That's why they used to call apes quadrumania. That no, they're not human. They have 4 hands. And that's true. You look at them. But look at Haeckel. He then takes Huxley's drawing and redraws it for his book, The Last Words of Evolution. And this whole drawing is bogus. First of all, let's go do the toes, the great toes, the big toes. He pulls them, humans, the big toe on a human is parallel to the toes. In apes, it's a thumb-like. It goes out to the side. He pulls all of the ape big toes in parallel like a human, which is a fraudulent drawing. That's a fraud, that's a fraud, that's a fraud, that's a fraud. Then look at what he does. I want to tell you about these skull sizes. A human is 1,000 cc's brain or so. A chimp is 500 cc's or so. But he shows a chimp brain and an orangutan brain, which is also 500 cc's, as big as or bigger than a human. That is also fraudulent. And it goes on and on and on. The guy did 58, and he was one of the reasons evolution really got started. One last quick one. I know you have a love of Neanderthal man and the story about that. Neanderthal man was found, it was actually found in 1938 in Gibraltar, but they didn't recognize what it was, and that was just a skull that was just put aside. But the first one that was recognized as Neanderthal man was 1859 in a place called Mettmann, Germany. Mettmann, Germany. We filmed there. And it was just a skull cap, just the top of the skull, and they couldn't tell what the heck it was. You know, it had some larger brow ridges, and there was this big discussion throughout the world. Was Neanderthal man Homo sapiens? Like, was it a modern man, or was it an ape man? And they didn't have an answer for this for 50 years until they found a nearly complete skeleton. And that nearly complete skeleton was found, and parts of it are on the left here, was found in La Chapelle aux Saints, France. And I filmed there also. And so now they find a complete skull, so they thought, and a nearly complete skeleton. And they could now say that Neanderthal man is an ape man. Who said this? A guy named Marcel Boule, who's over here on the right. He's the curator at the National Museum of France in Paris. He has been given a golden opportunity. He's been given a full skull from La Chapelle aux Saints, and basically a full skeleton, not complete, but it's enough. You got long arm bones, leg bones. My goodness, you could say a lot. And he says, oh, he comes up and came up with this diagram. Neanderthal man is basically a hairy gorilla. And when he walks bent over, and he actually has rocks and clubs to, go chase a future wife, and he is completely non-human. That is what Marcel Boule came up with. But it was fraud. And he provided the basis for this whole idea that Neanderthal man was an ape man, and it was based on 4 frauds, and nobody caught it. The most suspicious thing about Marcel Boule was that he was visited by Dr. Alish Hrdlicka from the Smithsonian in I'm going to make up the years here, but it's like 1907, 1923, and 1928 or something like it. Dr. Hrdlicka from the Smithsonian, who is a curator of anthropology, who deals with ape men and men, took a steamliner boat, because back then in the 1920s, there's no airfare. So he takes an ocean liner from New York City to Europe, travels to Paris, and says, I'm here. Like I told you, I was coming. I'd love to see your Neanderthal man. He said, well, there he is. He said, oh, can I look at the skull? No, you can't touch it. Doesn't that seem odd to you that somebody of that caliber would not be able to touch the skeleton parts that are at the Natural History Museum, not just once when it was a fresh skeleton? Oh, I think he found the skeleton in 1907, so it was probably, I don't know the years, but 3 times, even after the hoopla had gone down, he came back again. No, you still can't touch it. That's odd. And I have that documented. That is a sign of fraud. And it's not that it proves this fraud, but that's a sign that there's something fraudulent going on. And he continued to hide his fossils, not allowing other scientists to see them until he croaks in like 1949 or something like that. And once he dies, and scientists then slowly be able to examine his work, it's all made up. And I'm going to show you the 4 things he made up. It's the craziest story you've ever seen. First of all, Marcel Boule, who made up this story about this ape man, said the foramen magnum of the skull of La Chapelle aux Saints, here's a skull, the foramen magnum, it's not forward like a human, which indicates it's upright walking, but it's not back like an ape. It's somewhere between the ape position and the human position. What he didn't tell anybody, well, he you could have figured this out if you were just a genius and you read his monograph in French. But what he didn't indicate was that he had used cork, wax, and moved the foramen magnum. How could you move the foramen magnum? Because the skull looks, his skull copy looks full here. There was no way that you could move the foramen magnum. Oh yeah, here is where the bones are actually missing. He didn't indicate where bones are missing with white plaster. And when you see everything that's missing, you can move the foramen magnum either direction, and he so chose to move it because Neanderthal man is Homo sapiens by many evolution scientists. He moved it from the human position and moved it back to an intermediate position. That was his first fraud. And that was discovered in 1985 or 1989. And see, it takes a while to discover these things. And then the leg bone, the leg bone of Neanderthal, the tibia, that's the shin bone, tilted back a little bit. And he says, Marcel and Boole says, oh, look, because it's bent backwards, it's retroverted, that means it walks bent over like an ape. But I have this documented. Marcel and Boole saw this picture, and it's a modern human with a tibia that looks exactly with as far as the retroversion like Neanderthals. And modern humans don't walk bent over. He knew this bone existed, and yet he still went with it. It was walked bent over like an ape-man. And then his coup de grace, which nobody would ever have suspected that he might have changed the human comparison drawings, but I have to hand it to him that his successor up here on the top right, Dr. Ehrenberg, who succeeded him, once Boole dies, he can pull out the bones and like, what's going on here? Let's get to the truth. And it is like something bothered him about this drawing. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. But here's Boole's drawing. Chimpanzees, the spinous process of their neck bones here go straight back. Neanderthal man spinous processes go straight back. But look at humans, the spinous processes go down. So really, Neanderthal man, Marcel and Boole said, its neck is really like a chimp. And that's why it walks bent over, even more bent over than this picture, because it doesn't have the normal curvature. Ehrenberg takes a X-ray of a modern French human and places it over this drawing of a modern human neck bones, and it looks nothing like the human. I mean, this is creative evolutionary work. Ehrenberg traces the bones of the modern human X-ray, and this is what the bones look like. And I do this in my movie. I took a different X-ray of a human neck bones, and they do look like this. If you put this drawing and replace Boole's false fraudulent drawing with the real drawing of what humans, you really couldn't say anything because they all kind of go out to the back. That doesn't tell you anything. But that was yet another fraud of Marcel and Boole. So, Donnie, I think we should stop there. If you, I know we're going to go to questions, but I just want to say this, that if you don't believe me, please watch the video series. And if you don't believe me, please read volume 3 in our book series, which is Untold Stories of Human Evolution. It just came out. And read volume 4, the second volume. It's called The 9 Categories of Overturned Ape-Men. And read the bibliography. I want you to read this. It's 432 pages long. And everything is documented by the paragraph. I didn't give you just the reference. I gave you the paragraph and the interview words and the paragraph of the interview words. These books are meant for you. They're not meant for scientists, although a scientist would appreciate it because they're just totally accurate. But I want to show you how simple these books are to read. And this is most of what we talked tonight about, but it's more in the movies. But look how easy it is to read this book. If you are a plumber, if you're a homeschool mom, if you are a 7th grader, you can all understand it, because the book is just charts and pictures, simple explanations, no complicated words to try to lose the audience. I try to make it simplified words that everybody can understand what were they doing and how they were changing things. And I don't know, each book has about 900 pictures in it. So there's like, I don't know, 2,000 photographs, 2,000 references, plus a video series. I just ask you, just if you don't believe me, please keep an open mind and ask yourself, can I really prove evolution? You know, after watching the show that Donnie and I did last time and this show, and then this should upset you if you believe in evolution. This should upset you, and you should start your own grand experiment, just like I did when I was challenged about evolution. This should go to your core if you think, you know, logically, and you think, okay, you can't have it both ways, and you can't have soft evidence, and yeah. So I would hope that everybody really digs in and enjoys it. So Donnie, I'm going to shut up now so my wife is happy. And turn it back to you. Thank you.
I could listen to you talk for another hour and a half, brother.
Tell my wife that. I'm going to say, 8.4, Debbie.
That was one of the best ways I could spend drinking my coffee. So, yeah. Wow. And you know what? I agree with Lionheart Media here. He says that book looks awesome. I love the structure and format of your books. I love the mix of comprehensive text, but also beautiful pictures, just laid out all throughout your books. And it makes it easier to absorb because you got the pictures to go with the information, Carl.
Mm-hmm. You can thank Debbie for that, because, you know, I think she took, if I were to guess, don't hold me to this number, but somewhere around 200,000 photographs. Wow. So, yeah. So, you know, you're just getting the best of the best. And I worked through getting the best angle of that picture. So, you know, it's a lot of thought went into it.
It's funny because my mom and dad's names are Carl and Debbie, and my mom is also a photographer. Small world, brother.
That is scary.
Yeah, that's scary. This was meant to be. And my parents will be watching this too. So there's a shout out to them. Carl, we've had, as with the first program, excellent feedback. I'll be making several clips from this one as well, what I've been doing with our first part of this excellent series. We have part 3 coming up soon in another couple of weeks, Living Fossils, which I'm excited for, as I've been breaking this up into clips. Lionheart Media says, what is the link for the book? So I should have those links in the description box, Carl. Is there anything additional? Is there anything you want me to make sure is there for people to check out? If
you go to thegrandexperiment.com, it's the clearinghouse for all finding everything. So
perfect.
Right there, they might send you back to Amazon, but at least you can find where you can find the books or the videos or the streaming, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I guess my own question, and I mean, I could probably ask you questions for the next 4 hours because so much good information there, but I'm wondering, in light of the frauds, the errors, the mistakes that we see in terms of these icons of human evolution, that goes for the Australopithecines, Homo habilis, are there any defining traits found in these fossils, let's say in human fossils, that help to differentiate them from Australopithecines? So I understand a lot of them were frauds, but when we pick up bones in the dirt, we pick up these fossils, is there an easy way for us to tell, okay, this one's definitely human and this one belongs to some kind of ape creature?
You know, I would say the simplest defining thing is the pelvis.
Okay.
If you get a pelvis and it's flat like that, that's an ape pelvis where it doesn't turn forward. That is a ape. And the human pelvis is defining because it turns forward. It's not flat. See, it's not flat. It turns all the way forward. Oh, it's all the way forward. So that is, but the problem is that the evolution scientists have manipulated 3 or 4 of these pelvises
Right.
and changed them. So that doesn't do you any good. You could say brain size can help you. The chimps are about 500 cc's. Humans are about, 1,000 to 2,000, but that really doesn't help you because there are humans that we've documented very clearly in our book that go all the way down to 550 cc's. There's been, people on the earth living today and their brain's only 600, 700 cc's. And I have those totally documented on the Homo erectus chapter in book 4. So there's overlap of the brain sizes. And there are characteristics, for example, apes, their head goes back, it tilts back at the forehead. But the problem is that some humans, if you look at all the human skulls that have been collected, and these are in our book, many of these, some of them have tilted foreheads. And so you can't go by that only. And, like apes have a big brow ridge, whereas Europeans don't. But there are a lot of humans today that have big brow ridges that look like Neanderthal, that look almost like Neanderthal. So, yes, if you have all these things, but I would say for a non-professional, you're really vulnerable. They could pick up anything. It could be human and they could tell you it's ape, and an evolutionist could pick up an ape skull and tell you it's human. And you, without having the capacity to really analyze it, the audience is vulnerable. And that's why they've gotten away with this past tense for 150 years, but it's over now.
Right. I think that's a good answer because it's important that you point out false reconstructions based on the fragmented data, the manipulation of these parts, because you pointed out that a flat pelvis would be indicative of an ape. Okay, so we're dealing with some kind of ape here, or an Australopithecine type ape. And then the human pelvis turns forward and it's not flat. But the issue is that many of these Australopithecine, these pelvis specimens, they've manipulated them or reconstructed them in a way where they look kind of similar to the human pelvis of today.
No, they look human. They manipulate them to the point that they look totally human.
Totally human.
Dart did that. Don Johansson did that. And another person that altered the pelvis was Broom's pelvis of Mrs. Plez. And you can see that in our book on Mrs. Plez.
Do you believe that, so with all the frauds, the mistakes, I understand with Australopithecus sediba, that's another one of their favorite icons of human evolution. They've recently, I think the paleoanthropologist names were Ella Bean and Yoel Rack, and they discovered that sediba is actually the accidental mixture of human bones and ape bones. And so it's an artificial species, not a real species. And so a lot of what they pointed to as being transitional. Now, of course, I know there's evolutionists out there that are going to criticize. Not all paleoanthropologists agree with Ella Bean and Yoel Rack, but those two experts in the field are not creationists. And they've pointed out, yeah, this is not a real species. Some of these bones are human. Some of these bones are ape. Would that be considered like an accident, or would you consider that a fraud? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that example, Carl.
You can't say fraud. It's very difficult to say fraud unless you have proof of what the truth is, and then you have proof that they knew the truth and proof that he did the opposite of the truth. So the fraud is very difficult to come up with, but that's why finding 150 is crazy high.
Right.
Yeah. And the sediba we interviewed, there's a whole story about sediba, but we went to interview Lee Berger, who found sediba in Naladi in South Africa. And we flew 18 hours. And once we got there, I got off the plane and I told Lee Berger by email, hey, we're here. We're ready to interview about sediba in Naladi. He says, I'm not giving you the interview.
Wow.
I was like, why wouldn't you? And the reason I believe he didn't give the interview is because he found out shortly before we left that we were going to interview his partner, his colleague, Ron Clark, who you met tonight. And like, why would that make any difference?
Right.
He says, you can't even look at Sediba. You can't photograph the fossils. I'm not going to give you the interview. It's hidden, And by the way, that's a lot of these ape men that they say they're ape men, they won't let you see, and they won't let their colleagues see. But anyway, so we interviewed Ron Clark about it, and he said that Sediba is nothing more than Australopithecus africanus, and compare it to Mrs. Plez's skull. And we did. We obtained a picture of Mrs. Plez. We had taken that picture, and we had actually photographed Sediba years earlier. He didn't know that we had photographed it. And you put these two side by side. Sediba does not look like anything other than Australopithecus africanus, which is, nobody thinks that that's a human ancestor. So
Right.
you could get 100 opinions on any one of these, and I'd just be careful unless you can actually go photograph the fossils, which you can't because they won't let you see them if you're an evolution scientist. And unless you have a lot of knowledge, the audience is so vulnerable to these interpretations that I would encourage you not to even bother. Just say, okay, this is a fraudulent area of science, and it's the one outlier that says evolution is true. And with all this frauds, all these 43,000 errors that they've committed, you know what? It's over. I'm not going to pay attention to you guys anymore.
Well,
Just
yeah.
protect you,
At that point, it's kind of like the story of the boy who cried wolf. I mean, after so many frauds and errors and mistakes, what can we trust at this point? So suddenly 100 years later, now they got the big fine that we're all supposed to put our trust in. And what's interesting about what you say, how a lot of this is hidden. Lee Berger did not want to give you that interview. Well, you know what? The truth should not fear scrutiny. The truth should not fear debate. And so why hide this information? Why run from an interview? We're just all trying to get to the truth.
Amen. And this hiding fossils has been going on since 1880. It's not just Lee Berger. It was Eugene Du Bois with Pithecanthropus, which was Homo erectus. He hid that under his kitchen floorboards, and then moved it to the museum safe and would not allow any scientists to see it from 1896 to 1920. And the same was true for the Piltdown man, hidden from evolution scientists from 1912. They could see it, but couldn't touch it. 1912 to 1950. Same with Neanderthal, 1908 to La Chapelle Saint, 1908 through 1950. Same way with the current one, Sediba, can't see it. Naladi, can't see it. Ardipithecus, you can't see it. They won't let you see it. Same with the latest ape-man, Tumai, which is on display at every museum. He won't allow any evolution scientists who might have a second opinion to see the fossils, the copies of the fossils, or the CAT scans. See, science is supposed to be reproducible. So you say it's true, I could do the same experiment. I could come up with the exact same conclusion.
Right.
But this is how they hold on to their ape-man status, and then they can keep getting money in grants until they retire or die. Then who cares? I got my money.
Right. So you mentioned habilis, Homo habilis. Is that basically a wastebasket taxon then? It's not really a real species, or what would be the best way to, if someone were to ask, even just a skeptic or somebody interested, hey, what's the deal with Homo habilis? What would be a good quick response to what it is?
To read chapter 6 in my book, and I go through that in great detail. And Homo habilis, when they were finding all the Homo habilis, every time when they would pull out the first specimen, the second specimen, the third specimen, they'd say, oh, it's Australopithecus africanus. Mm-hmm. They even they thought they were Australopithecus africanus, and they kept putting it, saying, no, it's a new ape-man. No, it's a new ape-man. But if you read the high-level scientists like Bernard Wood or the scientists at the Australian Museum, they say their Homo habilis is non-existent. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention the best part. And see, this isn't a fraud, so I'm not telling you the good parts. This isn't a fraud. Dr. Johansson found, and Tim White found, a Homo habilis, and it was Oldivi hominid number 62, OH62, I think it was. And you know what it turned out to be? It was supposed to be halfway between an ape and a human, 4.5 feet tall. It turned out to be smaller than Lucy, who Lucy already looks like an ape. Smaller than Lucy, only 3 feet. And so it's not Homo, and it's just an Australopithecine.
Yeah, so basically what we find in the fossil record are pretty clear distinctions between that which is an ape and that which is human. And so a typical critic would ask this. And so again, we appreciate when our critics are here, our evolutionists. And so we kind of did address this, at least in terms of the fossil record, you know, these distinctions. But so the proponents of common descent will say we are apes taxonomically when they look to cladistics and taxonomy. And so this question here from Sydney Raptor, I appreciate it. Does Dr. Werner claim that humans are not great apes? If not, and that is what we're saying, we're not apes. If not, what are the specific features that would rule it out?
Thank you, Sydney, for that question. And you have to be very careful about developing a theory about using classification schemes, because the classification schemes can become circular reasoning, where you defined an ape as any animal that, you know, has hair and is primate and is greater than 3. You know, you can make all these criteria, but it's circular reasoning by what criteria you're going to use and what criteria you're not going to include in your definition of great apes. So, Sydney, and I mentioned this before, but I'll just go over it again. All of the apes, if you look at their feet, all apes have a hand-like foot. It looks like a hand. It looks like their hands. So the apes are quadrumania. They have 4 hands. They don't have 2 hands and 2 feet. It's like this. Whereas humans, it's like this, you know, the 5 toes. So just using that criteria, a human is a creature that has 5 toes that stick together, whereas apes do not. You could just use that one criteria, and then you say, well, humans are not apes. But if you change the criteria around and make a circular reasoning, yeah, you can believe that. And if you want to believe it, I don't care, but I think it's crazy. You know, think about here's a good one. Think about this one. Think about the best tool an ape can make, you know, and I think of a rock or something like that, a stick, you know. And then think of the best tool that a human can make. And you know what I think of the best tool that a human has made? It's the space station.
Yeah, space shuttle is what I was thinking too.
Yeah, space shuttle. Now that is a tool because they made it to do a task, you know. So okay, which is more? Is that a continuum between apes with their rock tools and then space station? You know,
right. Or streaming here together. Literally you in the States, me in Canada, doing a show together, sitting here. I mean, how does all this stuff work? I don't really know, but I trust it.
Also completely. Oh, and Sydney, and I'm not picking on you. Don't feel like I'm picking you, but this is everybody's thinking your question. So I'm saying your name, but I'm not picking on you. But you could use this criteria. Okay, what is the gene or the number of chromosomes for apes and humans? And, you know, apes have 48 chromosomes and humans have 46 chromosomes. So you could just say the definition of human is a primate with 46 chromosomes and with, you know, only 2 hands. So and then you can separate them again. But then if you want to ignore that and make humans apes so that you were all evolved, you ignore that criteria. So you could just throw in and throw out any criteria.
Or say, oh, there must have been a fusion, right? Rather than tapping out.
Yeah, chromosome 2 fused into the Y chromosome. Yeah, we've all heard that. But no, just those 2 criteria is simple enough to say, no, we are not apes. And believe me, you don't want your sister to be marrying an ape.
Yes, exactly. You go to the zoo or watch some of these documentaries, you'll quickly be able to tell what's an ape and what's not. What are your thoughts, Dr. Werner? It's a good question, Sydney. It's a question that nearly all evolutionists ask. So I'm glad that we're answering and engaging it. What are your thoughts on, I believe it's the hyoid bone that is it's different in Australopithecines. It's also different in living apes, extant apes, because it's that specific trait that gives us as humans the ability to talk. And it's unique in humans and only humans. It's why we can speak. I believe in the chimpanzees, it's got a different morphology. It's got a bulge rather than the type of morphology seen in humans. And so when we find a hyoid bone in the fossil record, and it has that same uniqueness that extant humans do, that gives us the ability to talk. Do you believe that that might be helpful in terms of at least one of these defining traits, Carl?
I have no knowledge on this topic. You know, I know what a hyoid bone is. You know, I'm a physician. You know, you got the larynx, the Adam's apple, but then right above it, there's a bone here, and most people don't even know it's there. It's a hyoid bone, but I have no knowledge of that, so I'll pass on that one.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. And, you know, I was going to ask a question based on what we're saying, but I think somebody actually asked that question already. Let me just find it in the chat.
This is fun doing these, and I really appreciate the audience, the live audience, and, you know, the challenges. I think it's so cool, you know.
Yeah. Well, we get to do it live in front of an audience of well over 100 people asking questions, giving their challenges. And yet you can do it from your home. I can do it from mine. And so here's a thought I had, and Sydney Raptor has already brought it up. So we'll put this up. So when it comes to Lucy, I think we dealt with Lucy in a comprehensive manner. And so what are your thoughts, Dr. Werner, on the other, you know, so-called 400 other specimens of Australopithecus afarensis? Actually, correct me if I'm wrong. When they say, oh, we've got 400 examples or specimens of whatever Australopithecine, that's not like a full skeleton of each. That could be like one single bone. And if they say that that's different from a different bone, then that alone would be a specimen. Is that right, Carl?
You'd have to ask that to Sydney, but yeah, you know, what 400 Australopithecine afarensis do you have? You know, we photographed a bunch of them in Laetoli, LH1, LH2, H3, you know, and you know what? They kind of look ape-like. They have these pillow-like cusps on their molars, and you know, they look, there's nothing that would say, oh, that's human-like to me. Now, I would love if Sydney could help me connect and get access to the Australopithecus afarensis fossils. But you know what? I cannot photograph the Lucy skeleton. That is crazy. And we've asked for photographs that they've already taken of the Lucy skeleton, the original photographs. Not allowed. We will not share these with you. And all this is in my book. We communicated with the Ethiopian Museum. Can we photograph the Lucy skeleton? No, you cannot. Can we have photographs that you took of the Lucy skeleton? No. So I can't even get Lucy, the original photographs of Lucy. I have the only original photograph of Lucy I have is that me, and I had to pay $600 for it. They like, oh, this is so easy. Everyone can get access to these bones. Yeah, no problem. Good luck. Because
good luck.
And by the way, unless you can actually know that you can do this and know that you can, okay, I'm going to do a study on Australopithecus afarensis and I'll be able to see all the bones. Unless that's true, and it's not true, then you can't study the science. What you're looking at is copies, and they're notoriously poor and misleading. And unless you have access to the data, and everybody has access to all the data, this is not science. It's a made-up story by a few guys that want to get famous saying they found an ape-man.
And
I hate to be brutal. But that is the truth.
Well, it makes it very difficult for research, makes it very difficult for us to be objective in our conclusions. And as you pointed out, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of these major findings, we also talked about this with whale evolution in our last show, it's always the same couple people making all these major findings and then keeping the data mostly hidden, the real-time data, that is. It's suspicious.
Do you know that Richard Leakey, who found the Turkana boy, was not allowed to look at the Turkana boy's skeleton anymore at the Kenya Museum? That's strange, isn't it? That everyone should be able to go see the original, or if they, or at least provide photos. And if you still need to, then sure. No, Richard Leakey says he is not allowed to look at the fossils at the Kenya National Museum that he found. This is a total non-access at this area of science, and so it is not science. It's a club. It's like an old boys club.
Yeah.
If you write something good about my fossils, I'll let you see them. But if I think you're going to be a bad boy and criticize me, no, you cannot see them. And this has been going on for 120 years. It's not just one scientist. It is the field. And believe me, I know. I just spent 27 years doing this.
That's right. That's right. And I love how in your arguments, in your conclusions, you have directly interviewed a lot of these experts directly. You've asked the appropriate questions. See, the problem is a lot of people are not asking the right questions, but Carl, you are asking the right questions. And therefore we're coming to, I would say, game-changing conclusions here that you've given us, Carl. So this question comes in from Sophia. Appreciate it. And so she asks, are there any other lines of evidence, example, tools, associated fauna, that support your classification of STW 53, maybe?
I assume she's meaning STW 53. And all I want to say this, Donnie, is Sophia, if that is really her picture, she is a beautiful girl or woman or whatever. That is a beautiful person. But I'll tell you some strange things about STW 53, which was found at Sterkfontein, South Africa, where we filmed the director of the museum, the director of the program down there, Francis Thackeray. And we interviewed the Ron Clark. So Ron Clark, Francis Thackeray, and habilis and Tobias all worked together. They all worked at that institution where STW 53 was, which is the University of Witwatersrand, where the original fossils are, and Sterkfontein. And they say that all of Tobias's work was BS. These guys say it, and they're pro-evolution. They said he moved the layer. It was supposed to be one layer, but he said, no, it's not really that layer. This was found in a different layer. And then he said the tools that he found there don't go with that layer. And when they described it on camera, it's like he was just making things up down there, changing the layer. And you can read those quotes about that, changing the layer, in my book in the STW 53 Homo habilis section. So when you hear these reports, Sophia, that this is, strong evidence, when you actually get there and start interviewing these guys, they tell a completely different story. It doesn't line up at all with what the original scientists say.
That's right. And this is just filled with circular reasoning, I think, as you've pointed out, because you've pointed to paleoanthropologists that I think have admitted basically that you've had humans or the Homo genus existing at the time of these Australopithecines 3 to 4 million years ago, based on certain isolated bones and footprints, like the Laetoli footprints. But then they would conclude, based on circular reasoning, I believe, I wonder what your thoughts are on this, Carl, that, well, these can't be modern Homo sapiens, or these can't be, true humans, because true humans didn't exist 3 to 4 million years ago. And so a lot of your paleoanthropologists have to conclude that these Laetoli footprints, which look very similar to human footprints, belong to an ape or near ape rather than humans, because of their evolutionary philosophy. What are your thoughts on that, Carl?
Do you want me to be honest with you?
Yeah.
I mean, if I were honest and didn't feel like I was going to blow up your audience, I don't believe that this, when you start talking dates, I don't believe this is science. This is made up.
Right.
And so when a scientist says this fossil is 2 million years old and it was, in this particular layer, I don't believe it. And here's why. If it's true, it's science. And if it's science, it's reproducible. And then these numbers and these layers would not change for that fossil. But if you follow a fossil over time, like for example, Nebraska man, supposed to be, and this is in my book, it's like I have a page of it, supposed to be this many million years old, and then it becomes this many million years old, then it becomes this many million years old, then it becomes this many, and they'll change the date 6 or 7 times. Same way with 1470. It's supposed to be this many million years. No, it's this many million years. No, it's this layer. No, it's this many million years. No, that's this million years. So I don't believe any of it, you know, and I know that's the framework we're presented with, but you can change any layer and you can change any date you want to if you have the gumption to change it. And that's what Tobias was doing. He was changing the layers, and that's what I have example after example after example of that. And it says that it's not reproducible, that the scientist can't come up with the same date. If an independent scientist comes in, he can come up with a completely different date or layer. So I don't ascribe, if you really want me to be honest, blunt, forget it. These dates are all BS, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's it's true. I think that's why they're constantly, I'm pretty sure they did that, if I remember correctly, with Laetoli, because where they were originally getting in terms of their dates with Laetoli was not lining up with their evolutionary story, evolutionary philosophy. So they had to redate, move things around. So it really is just a mess. And so here's a good question, common question. Appreciate it. Comes in from Apologetics 101. Thank you very much for your question here, Brian. And so question for Carl. How does he respond to the claim that Lucy's foramen magnum is like a human? So if I remember correctly, just to lay out their argument, typically they'll argue that the foramen magnum on the Australopithecines is positioned more closely to that of modern humans, but then they'll say that the angle of it is more similar to that of a chimpanzee, right? So then this way they can say, oh, well, this is your perfect transitional morphology. What's a good response to that, Carl?
I don't have one. I've never seen the foramen magnum of Lucy. Why? Because I can't examine the fossil. I can't be provided photographs. Only the scientists who have the control of the fossil can make claims. And you can't, well, how is that even honest? You know, that we can't all see Lucy's foramen magnum. Only the scientists who want to promote that she's an ape-man can see the foramen magnum. That's bull. That's just bull. That just don't even, I don't even want to go there. This is like, they're hiding the fossils. They've been hiding the fossils for 120 years, all the important ones, and they won't allow others to see it. Not all scientists, not all fossils, but just the important ones, you can't see them, you know, while it's going on, while the discussion's going on. So, you know, I'm probably blowing up your audience. I'm probably making them pull out their hair. You know, this guy crazy. But you have to understand, I've been BS so many times in my lifetime about human evolution that I've just kind of at the end of it. It's like I've been wronged so many times, been told a story, and there's no basis for it. So unless you're going to fix this problem and make these fossils accessible, make all the scientists accessible, this thing is over. Good night. You know, the last person out of the room, turn off the light.
Right. And like you said earlier, it's this club of a few individuals making all of these supposed epic finds. And then they're the only ones that really have access to the original finds, the real raw data. And so it's hard for us in research mode to make any conclusions, especially trustworthy conclusions, in light of the fact that there's been so many mistakes, errors, frauds. So I think that's a good point. So Brian's got a follow-up here on back to taxonomy. And so he's wondering, so you did talk about this earlier. I think you made some excellent points, Carl. He's wondering if you've looked into cladistics and the way these terms are being redefined and reclassified as evolutionists. He also says he can't wait for your interview on living fossils. So it looks like you got another interview scheduled. You're a busy man, Carl. You're an important man. So I appreciate all your work and time.
Listen, cladistics is where you look at an animal and say, okay, this animal has nails instead of claws. has a warm temperature instead of a cold-blooded temperature, has ears instead of just, just little openings there. And so you analyze, this animal has all these 99 traits, okay? Then you go to the next animal. Okay, now this animal has these 99 traits, and then this animal has these 99 traits. And there's okay, now we're going to look, and we're going to follow evolution by looking at the traits. Okay, the oldest animal would have had, these traits, but as Apologetics 101 has pointed out, that it's just like classification. You just pick the traits that you want to be important for this example, and then you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that evolution of humans is true because you have used cladistics, which is counting traits. The problem is, which traits have you not counted, and which traits that you would think, would be the most important, like, oh, these animals all have heads, but we're going to ignore that they all have heads. I'm just being tongue-in-cheek here. You just ignore the traits that you need to make a cladistic analysis of animals to prove evolution. It's circular. There's no truth in that.
Since we're all made of DNA, RNA, proteins, we have similarities in morphology, physiology, anatomy. Isn't it just basic that whatever animal you pick in the animal kingdom, doesn't it by definition have to be more similar to another creature? So if I were to pick a dog, well, then a dog has to be more similar to one creature and more dissimilar to another. So if we pick humans, well, it just so happens to turn out that, sure, we look a lot more like the chimpanzee than we do with a dog or a fish. And so there's going to be that natural hierarchy without evolution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You got to be really careful to judge evolution by ape-man evolution, human evolution. Let me just tell you why this is really a poor place to start your thought processes to see if evolution is true or not. If evolution is true, you should be able to see a bacteria, which is so small, it's microscopic, evolving into let's say a coral, like a sea pen, which is 2 feet tall. Those are so dissimilar. And if you could provide the intermediates all along there, you would say, gosh, evolution is true, because the lowest layer has a bacteria, then the next layer is bigger than a bacteria, and the next layer is kind of a little polyp thing, and next thing is this, and then all of a sudden, yeah, it's going to the coral. But none of that exists for all the animal phyla. There's nothing between the big jumps. It's only when you start with two animals that are very similar that you can easily create evolution. Oh, let's pick an ape and a human, because we already know they look similar, and say, let's show that apes evolved into humans. You could get so confused on that because there's so many overlapping traits at the beginning. So you shouldn't start there. If you're just trying to figure out if evolution's true, you should say, okay, let's pick a wild animal that's so different than everything else, like a pterosaur, a flying reptile. There's no reptiles that fly other than pterosaurs, pterodactyls. So let's see the intermediates between a lizard on the ground with 4 legs going to a pterodactyl. Now that would be a good proof of our evolution, because the intermediates should be there as much as when they're dissimilar animals,
right,
as in similar animals, but they're absent. When you choose to see the intermediates between a tree shrew, which is like a mouse, and a bat, there's nothing in between the two. If evolution was true, you should be able to see all those intermediates. But the intermediates are absent for all phyla, most of the vertebrate groups, and it's only when you start picking out 2 similar animals, then you can kind of prove evolution. But it's just, you're just starting from the wrong starting point. You just want it to be true,
Well, in our last show, Well, firstly, to what you're saying, yeah, if we go back billions of years to single-celled like ancestors, bacteria-like organisms, and from there you got to go from a prokaryote to a eukaryote, or single-celled ancestor to a multi-celled ancestor to a fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, then humans, there should be countless. There should be unlimited transitional forms in the fossil record, yet we sit here all day with the evolutionists and argue over a few interesting ones that you've overturned, like whale evolution, what we see with the hominins, Archaeopteryx, Tiktaalik. But how come there's not hundreds of thousands of transitional forms to the point where we literally can't deny it?
Duane Gish, who's a creationist from the 60s, said that you should walk into any museum and look at any animal and see all the evolutionary intermediates for every animal, like trilobites, for crinoids. You should be able to just trace it. And it should be like so common, you don't even know what they are because they're all intermediates. But that's not what it is. The groups appear suddenly. Evolution never occurred. It's just a made up story that now has been proven wrong with the objective looking at 1 billion fossils. Now, if you want to believe it, I get it. Go ahead and believe it. If you want to stick your head in the sand, but it's not true. It just,
it's not science.
It's not science. It just doesn't show it in the fossil record. It's just, you want it to be true. And, a simpler thing is say, you know what? He's right. If Carl Werner can flip from being an evolutionist to being a God guy, and believe me, that was a painful choice for me. That was very painful.
Yeah.
You know what? Maybe I could do it too. And that's the thing about God, is that all are welcome. Everybody is invited to the party, and Amen. There's nobody that is excluded. Nobody. I don't care what background you have. If you're a terrible person, if you're some other religion, God is inviting everybody to the party that, hey, I created you. Come find out about me. But, if I can do it, and I was the hardest sell, it took me months to wrestle with that. If I could do it and come to Christ, you can too. I mean,
you came to Christ kicking and screaming, but you came to him nonetheless. So they can do it as well. Well, I think that's great, Carl. It's not always about winning arguments, it's about winning souls, bringing people to Christ, planting some seeds. And you have most certainly done that in our first 2 parts to this series. You weren't lying, Carl. This was a comprehensive program, widespread fraud in human evolution. We've discussed Homo habilis. We've discussed Lucy, Erectus, Neanderthal, Haeckel. This has been an excellent discussion, Carl, and I really appreciate your time. And so I want to hand it to you in case you had any final words, final thoughts you wanted to leave us with before we wind things down here.
Yeah, I've been addressing the evolutionists in the audience, but I want to address now the creationists in the audience. This experiment that I did, and pouring my blood out on the sidewalk, so to speak, and it's not going to do any good if it dies with Carl Werner. If this information just dies, it has to reach your family and has to reach your kids. And it's imperative that every person out there then spreads this in any way they can, either handing out the videos, recommending the book, but most importantly is, if you have kids, is that you get the teacher manual and you go through the 4 books. Here comes the hard sell where he's going to try to make some money, where you get the teacher's manual that go along with the 4 books. See, this is a teacher's manual. And you take your kids or your classroom, if you have a school, you take them through the 4 semesters of Evolution, the Grand Experiment, which is the 4 volumes, and I guarantee you they will be well ready to answer the world's questions for them about evolution. Without it, if you just let your kids just swim and just go wherever the stream goes, they're going to die, because they're going to get swallowed up just like I got swallowed up in college when my professor told me about Haeckel's embryos. They will not be prepared, and they're just going to go the way of the world. The only way that we can turn this world around is that everybody really helps get this message out from Carl Werner to your nephews and nieces, your children, your brothers and sisters. I just can't do it. You know, I'm spent. You know, now it's your turn to do the work, which is the real work of teaching this to others. So please consider teaching it. Consider spreading the word as much as you can. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. You've put in the work. You've put in the time, the energy, the effort. And so it's up to us. It's up to you and the audience. Get the books. Check the description box for links to that. I've also got them posted here currently in the live chat. And share this content around, because the truth of biblical creation, the truth that you are providing everybody here, Carl, is just so incredibly important, because it has eternal value. That is for sure. And so please pass these videos around to your friends, your family. Get this information out to as many people as possible. That's what we're asking for. And so, Carl, I'm looking forward to part 3, which we are going to, if I'm not mistaken, specifically focus on living fossils. And that's coming up in a couple weeks. So I'm excited, Carl. Yeah. All right. I appreciate your time. Time has flown by. This was comprehensive. I'm looking forward to rewatching. Those just joining us, which I see people still joining us in the live chat, make sure to watch from the beginning, because there was a lot of important information. And Carl, your slides and visuals were excellent. 10 out of 10, brother. I really enjoyed it.
Thank my wife for that. You can thank Debbie for her 200,000 progress.
Thank you, Debbie, and Carl, for all your hard work. So thank you to the audience. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate your questions, even the critics, the objections, the challenges, and also the support. So God bless you all. Standing for Truth is out.